Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. If you like this podcast, you will love my new anthology called Moms Don't Have Time to Have Kids. Check it out, and you'll hear from 49 authors about all sorts of things moms don't have time to do. All the authors have been on this podcast. Also, check out my TikTok with Zibby and Tracy, my other podcast, Sex Talk with Zibby and Tracy. Check out Moms Don't Have Time to Write on Medium. And of course, my new publishing company called Zibby Books. And now back to our daily author interview site and a quick hello from some of my kids. Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Enjoy the show. Happy New Year, everyone. I hope you all had a great break. I wanted to let you know about something that I've been talking a lot about on social media at Zibby Owens, which is the hashtag 22 in 22 challenge. We are at Zibby Books, we are encouraging everybody, like all of you, to visit 22 bookstores in 2022. And we're going to provide a whole series of incentives for every 5 visits, and you'll be entered to win a $500 shopping spree, and you'll get fun things like bookmarks and all the rest. Plus, you'll be part of a great community of people all helping support bookstores, authors, and more. We're really, really excited about it. If you want to join, sign up. You just go to 22in22.net. That's 22in22.net and click I'm in and put your information. And then every time you go to a bookstore, you just quickly go back on the site and click log a bookstore visit. And then we'll be keeping track and we'll be following up with all of your different achievements and awards and everything. So please sign up, spread the word. 22 in 22, get your friends to join and start visiting bookstores, and it'll be really fun and exciting. So here's to a wonderful 2022. I'm so excited that you're listening to my podcast and doing all the fun things that I have been trying to bring into the world. So here we go, 2022, hashtag 22 in 22. Erica C. Barnett is the author of Quitter, a memoir of drinking, relapse, and recovery. And I definitely talked a bit too much about myself in this episode, so forgive me. Erica C. Barnett is an award-winning political reporter. She started her career at the Texas Observer and went on to work as a reporter and news editor for the Austin Chronicle, Seattle Weekly, and The Stranger. She now covers addiction, housing, poverty, and drug policy at her blog, The C is for Crank. She has written for a variety of local and national publications, including the Huffington Post, Seattle Magazine, and Grist. Welcome, Erica. Thanks so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Okay, your memoir. Let's discuss. Quitter. First of all, tell listeners what your memoir is about, the full subtitle, because I'm afraid I'm going to get it wrong because I don't have it in front of me now that I've been displaced into this other room. So yeah, tell us everything.
Sure. Yeah. It's called Quitter, a memoir of drinking, relapse, and recovery. And it's sort of in the tradition of quit lit, which is, the genre of books that are about quitting. In my case, alcohol. I quit drinking a little under 7 years ago as we're recording this. And but the book is really primarily about my experience of relapse in the process of recovery and in the process of trying to quit drinking. I wrote it, because as I was trying to get sober and as I was, failing again and again, I became really, really obsessed with reading quit lit books. There's tons of great books out there. A friend of mine, Sarah Hepola, wrote a book called Blackout. There's just, any number of books by women. Carolyn Knapp's Drinking a Love Story is a classic.
It's like one of my favorite books of all time.
Yeah. And so I read those obsessively over and over and over again and just thinking like, why can't I get it? Why can't I get it? These women got it. And I read a lot of men's books too and sort of related to those stories a little more because they were a little more in line with the way that I drank, which is constantly from the second I woke up to the second I passed out at night. But the thing that I sort of noticed in the vast majority of those books is they didn't talk about relapse. They talked about sort of getting worse and drinking more and hitting rock bottom and something really, usually pretty dramatic happening. Not in all cases, but something happened where they just said, I'm done. And then they were done. And I didn't understand why that didn't happen for me, since that's the story and that's what's supposed to happen. And then, I started trying to get sober. I started getting a little more serious about it and going to AA meetings, to other types of, group meetings, to therapy, all these different things that I describe in the book. And I realized that actually, just anecdotally, and as it turns out, in reality, most people actually do relapse at least once and often quite a number of times before they finally are able to quit or reduce their drinking or whatever, sort of recovery looks like for them. And, that gave me a lot of hope because it made me realize that I wasn't failing every single time that I, quote unquote, failed to stop drinking and picked up again. And I really wanted to, so getting back to the memoir, I really wanted to tell that story because for me, if I had known that it was actually normal and that I wasn't insane and that I wasn't just an utter failure, I think it might have been a little easier for me and it wouldn't have taken as many years because it took about 6 years of pretty solidly trying before I finally was able to quit in February of 2015.
Wow. Well, the way you write about it is so really just you're in it with you, right? You're in the moment, you're in the liquor store, you're in your office, like packing up. I mean, that scene that your coworkers tried to get you into treatment and then you went, but it was not successful and you showed back up to get your belongings and, the people who you thought were your allies were not, which often happens in all of these types of stories, right? People have a limit that they're willing to like sort of go to. But I have to say, like, as you're going home and waking up and bleeding and, all this stuff, like I was in it every second. Like you just take the reader right in. You're a really great writer. I guess I should have just said that. You're a great writer. There.
Thank you. Well, I mean, and I think like, one response that I've gotten, which has been, to me, it's actually a great compliment, even if people don't always mean it this way, is that I come across as really unlikable in the book. And I think, and people tell me that, and I get, people saying, I really can't sympathize with this person because of course, like I read the Amazon reviews because I am, an online person and I just can't, I'm on Twitter all the time. I can't help but see, how people are reacting. And when people say that, I mean, that was my intent. I was really unlikable and most people didn't like me, and I mean, even my best friend couldn't stand me. And my parents couldn't stand me and nobody could stand me because I was becoming an unlikable person, or I was an unlikable person. And, when I read back and sort of even think about it now, first of all, it's a long time ago at this point, and it feels like a different person living a different life, quite frankly. Like when I read about that, I'm like, who the hell is this girl? And second, I don't like that person and I'm frustrated with her. And I'm like, well, girl, why can't you get it? Because when you're sort of on the outside looking in at addiction or just at any sort of compulsive behavior that someone is engaging with that's maladaptive, you're like, why don't you just stop doing that thing that's maladaptive and do the thing that is, better for you? And that is the nature of addiction. I mean, it's, or any, sort of mental illness, it's not entirely within your control. I mean, ultimately, you are the only person who can sort of take the steps that are necessary to pull yourself out of that. But it's not as simple as stop doing the bad thing and do the good thing.
I mean, I feel like I have, not to compare or whatever, like I have the same thing with eating. It's so much easier people saying I have a drinking problem. I feel like I have an eating problem. Like I'm just, something I struggled with my entire life. And I just like can't get a handle on it. And I keep trying new things, like what you're saying, like you try to quit and try to like, no sugar and no this, it's a whole like diet culture really, but then it haunts you. Cause I'm like, look at everybody else. They don't have a problem. Look at them. They're like, obviously not struggling with their eating. And why am I struggling? And how old do I have to get before this freaking ends? Do you know what I mean? I'm already 45 years old. So anyway, I understand sort of having this issue that like, not to compare your alcoholism and whatever, but
I think they are very comparable. I mean, I do, the reason I say like addiction or a compulsion or like a mental disorder or a maladaptive behavior, I do think they're all the same. And I think there's addictions. I mean, there are all different kinds of addictions and there's behavioral addictions too that aren't like, chemical necessarily to the extent that alcoholism is or a heroin addiction is. But man, I mean, I talk in the book about like from the time I was, I don't know, I don't think I spell this out this explicitly, but I think I was like 8 when I started exercising with my mom and, and like paying attention to what I ate and and even now, like if you if you look, I mean, I've tried to sort of channel that behavior into more productive areas of my life, but like, I own a business. My New Year's resolution is to not work on Saturdays this year. Not Sundays, because I'm going to keep working on Sundays. I'm going to keep working 6 days a week, but like I have like, to-do lists every day, and I'm just like meticulous about that stuff. And like, it's all the same behavior. I think like sort of being a quote unquote control freak can play into being an alcoholic. It can play into having an eating disorder. It can play into like wanting to work a minimum of 60, 70 hours a week. I think they're all the same kind of behavioral compulsions. And I'm saying this is just based on my own experience and observation. I'm not a scientist, but this is just, what I've observed of my own behavior, and then the many, many, many people I've met in recovery who, have to kind of fight against other kind of addictions. I mean, gambling addiction, again, anecdotally seems really common as a secondary addiction among people who've quit drinking or doing drugs. Look at people who smoke compulsively. A lot of people start smoking in rehab. So I think it's all kind of comes from the same impulse toward control. Although, of course, like paradoxically with addiction, you lose all control ultimately.
Totally. Wow. I feel like now I'm going to have a little bit of therapy here. This is like introspection to anybody who struggles with stuff. Yeah, I know. I think that's the hardest part too, for people who like to control. And by the way, like my New Year's resolution was not to work before 9, right? Because
wow. See, exactly.
I'm like,
I mean,
blushing
it's the
as
same thing.
I say this. Like, I'm not going to work before I drop the kids at school. Like, I'm not going to post. I'm not going to check email, except for like the school, and even that's been hard.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes those things work. Like I just last year, my New Year's resolution was I'm not going to look at Twitter for more than 5 minutes a day. And I actually stuck to that, which was really hard for me because I was getting a little compulsive about it. And I just realized like, this is just feeding like negative energy into my brain first thing in the morning, every single day. So, it's I think it's achievable. No work before 9 is achievable. And me not working on Saturday is achievable. We can do it.
Yeah. Saturday, I don't know that I don't know. I know. Have you read Tiffany Schleyen's book called 24/6? It's all about taking a tech Shabbat. So her whole family, they apply sort of the wisdom of the Jewish tradition of Shabbat to technology. And so every Saturday, starting Friday night till Saturday sundown, nobody in the family uses technology at all. So, which obviously cuts out.
That's amazing.
And she says she's been doing it for, 10 years now, something crazy. And it's like the best part of their week and everything. And I've talked to her many times about this at this point. And every time I talk to her, I'm like, I'm going to try it. I'm going to do it. And, it's really hard. I don't know who's worse at this point, the kids or me, but it's hard. Well, where do you think that do you think anxiety plays a role do you think there's like sort of comorbidity in that? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I talk in the book about, sort of having this incredibly anxious personality from the time I was very, very young. I had insomnia from the time I was about, 7 or 8 years old. I'm an only child. And I think that, my family really piled onto me this notion that, and I think, mostly to the good, but this idea that like I was going to be a super achiever. My grandparents, my granddad was the first in my family to go to college. My grandmother did not go to college, and both my parents did. But like the expectation was like, you're going to go to medical school, or you're going to do something amazing with your life, whatever it is. And you're going to get straight A's and, on and on and on. And so I was sort of primed to be a super achiever. And that causes a lot of anxiety. And I started drinking, I think, to sort of deal with social anxiety, which I think is really common just among people in general. But, it just became sort of a tool for, I don't even want to say a crutch because it was a tool for dealing with anxiety of every kind. It's alcohol is a depressant. It kind of shuts down some of your higher cognitive functions, including the sort of hamster wheel in your brain, or at least there's a hamster wheel in my brain that is just constantly reminding me of like everything I'm not doing. Yeah. Like at every moment, and like you're not doing this, you're not doing this, you're not doing enough, you're disappointing this person, you didn't respond to this email. And so it's a tool, or it was a tool for me to kind of shut that up for a little while. Ultimately, as I said, it's a very maladaptive tool for me personally, and there are lots of better ways. I got really into cognitive behavioral therapy, which I think is just an amazing tool for people with anxiety, who, especially those who also like to write. But yeah, it's, anxiety and addiction, I think, go hand in hand just as much as like depression and addiction do.
I want to do a survey of authors to find out what percent have anxiety issues, because I really feel like it's like 90%. I feel like there's also something with writing through it too, which helps the anxiety, or sort of setting it to paper, or I don't know.
Yeah.
I just keep finding this over and over again, the same sort of themes and struggles and all of that.
Yeah, I would say I'm not one of those writers who loves to write. I love having written, and it's kind of like, I discovered this when I started, during the pandemic, I started running, in part to, deal with stress, and in part because I couldn't go to the gym. And it was kind of the same thing. Like I hate running, and I kind of hate writing. And I just, in my professional life, I'm a political writer, and I'm a reporter and cover local news and politics. And I love the feeling of being done with something. It's the greatest feeling in the world. But the process of writing it, 80% of the time kind of sucks. So it's the feeling of like, oh my gosh, I did that and it's done. And now I can put it out in the world, and I don't have to, it's not going to burden me anymore. I think that's how I write through anxiety.
Do you put things on a to-do list that you've done just so you can cross them out?
Yes. And it's funny, when I was first getting sober, I don't know, maybe this is not funny but sad. I kind of can't tell the difference anymore, but like when I was first just kind of coming out of the last place that I went, which was a detox facility, and just trying to even sort of deal with thinking about the wreckage of my life. I had tens of thousands of dollars in debt. I had tons of people who I needed to, apologize to and make amends to. Nobody trusted me, and I didn't have a job. I didn't know how to get a job. My rent wasn't paid. I would do to-do lists that were like, brush teeth, take a shower, go outside and get the mail, and it really started from there, just kind of feeling like, okay, I'm doing the basics of my life. And now, of course, like, it's spun out into just like, today I wrote down prep for this podcast, and I was like, yep, I already did that yesterday. Check.
I do that too. That's why I asked.
Yeah. So I could see that list getting smaller, and it gives me like that little dopamine rush of like, I'm actually doing things. Yeah, it's definitely, I think it's a pretty healthy coping mechanism for anxiety, but I don't know what my therapist would say about that.
Sounds like you have a pretty good therapist.
I do, actually.
Yeah. You should get her on. I should do a sideshow of like all the writers and
authors, therapists.
Oh my gosh. They wouldn't be able to say anything, but it would be so funny. Maybe one special episode or something.
Yeah.
Like that. Oh my gosh. So what was it like then, sort of reliving these moments, especially the unsavory ones that you didn't feel as proud of, and when you felt your most unlikable and sort of vulnerable, what was it like sort of writing through it? And then now that it's out, like, do you have any regrets, or do you feel exposed? I know you're talking about people who don't like it, which, you can't please everybody. And,
yeah,
I don't buy into that. Like, forget it. They're not your people. That's okay.
It's a losing game. I don't have any regrets. The thing about writing through it is, I don't think I could have written it right after right as I was coming out of the whole story. And not that the story's over, but right as I was sort of coming out of the part that I write about in the book, I wasn't ready, and I had to process it, and I had to do all that, all those amends to people, and sort of like paying back my debts, and just taking care of life, getting a job, getting a new apartment. All those things that were really hard in the moment. And once I had done that, and once I had kind of processed it, and, I went to a lot of AA meetings, which is like nothing but, it's basically cognitive behavioral therapy by non-professionals over a very long period of time, where you repeat the same stories over and over again. And like, once, just in sort of telling your story in that context, it loses its power to hurt you, I think. And so by the time I wrote the book, I felt pretty comfortable talking about it. And I was sort of not dissociated from it, but I was distant enough that I could be a little dispassionate. And then I don't have any regrets about the way that I wrote about it. I guess the only thing about writing a memoir about kind of what I've learned from my experience is that, once you've written it, it's done. And I've continued to learn. And I've actually continued to sort of change my thinking about addiction and about, my own experience and the people in my life and how they reacted. And, so life goes on and you evolve and you have different perspectives on things based on your experience. And yet, it's all just kind of set in stone in this one moment when you sent the book off to your publisher. So that's just sort of the nature of memoir. Maybe I should write another one, but I'm proud of the way that I set out the story. There was you mentioned the people at my work who I thought were my allies. It's one of those people. I actually do think that the people who were at my work and who I talk about, I think in the very first scene of the first chapter, taking me to rehab and then when I got back, firing me or sort of orchestrating my firing. I think they actually were my allies, just not in the way that I wanted them to be at the moment. And I was contacted by one of the people, one of the two women publisher of the magazine where I worked that I got fired from. And she was really mad at me. And, she was like, you really make me look horrible. And it's like I was trying to help you. And so I do sort of regret that, if anybody read it that way, because I was sort of trying to paint myself as the villain in that scenario and in a lot of the scenarios in the book, because my behavior, I want people to come away thinking that, was a hard person to like. And so to the extent that that people would read it and think and sympathize with my point of view, when it's a distorted sort of addiction-oriented point of view, I don't want people to come away with that impression, but I can't really control that either.
What I say to my kids is it's not that people don't like you, or it's not that I don't like you, it's that it's your behavior, right? So Your behavior may have been unlikable, but that doesn't mean people totally gave up on you. I mean, did they?
No, I mean, that's kind of the amazing thing. I mean, one of the things they say in AA all the time that I don't think is a very good bit of blanket advice is, you're going to have to get all new friends and, and get rid of everybody from your old life. And, in certain circumstances, and maybe like when AA was being founded in the 1930s, around men who would go out and drink with each other, like maybe that was true. But one of the amazing things about my story is that every single person who was there with me at the beginning of it, when I sort of first started going down that path of addiction, they all came back and they're all still here. I mean, a lot of them didn't go away. My best friend Josh, who was kind of, I was telling him the other day, he said, "Oh, I just read the section about me again." And I was like, "What are you talking about? The whole book is about you." He never left. I mean, he got very, very frustrated with me, but, I mean, he's still my best friend. And so I was very, very lucky. And I also was very determined to sort of mend those relationships. I mean, it takes a lot of work, but yeah, I mean, I despite having kind of a dramatic story, I was really lucky at the kind of end of the book and still have all my great friends. And we have much stronger relationships too, because they're based in, a foundation of a lot more honesty.
Are you afraid now that you've have this whole book that came out and have sort of said that you're like in a good place? Like, are you afraid secretly that maybe you're going to relapse again, and what would happen then? Like, do you fear that?
I mean, I think I did at first because I thought, oh my gosh, like I'm jinxing
Right,
things
yeah.
by putting this out in the world. But I think, I mean, first of all, if I relapse, it's not going to be because I said that I am
No.
person who relapses. I'm just sort of I'm talking back to my own like sort of self-talk, which is like, oh no, you said things are good, so things are going to be bad, because that's how my self-talk works. But I think if I relapse, which at this point, I'm 7 years in, you're considered to be in remission after about 5 years. So the odds of drinking now are about the same as somebody who has never taken a drink before. Now, I'm not saying those are just statistics. It has, nothing to do with me in particular, but I think I have tools, and I think like I know what to do, and I think I know what steps I would need to take at that point. Sort of learning that relapse isn't the end of most people's story, and that you can actually recover after relapse, I think gives me a lot more confidence in the fact that if I do relapse, that isn't necessarily the end of the story or the worst thing that's ever happened to anybody, which is definitely what I thought when I was trying to quit and relapsing. I felt like a failure. And in fact, I was typical.
Well, I think, the journey, so to speak, is never over for really anybody. And if it's not that, I think you're so right. It's just sort of managing the impetus for all of that behavior, right? Managing what comes underneath, or managing the temptation, or managing, I don't know, something deeper than just the behavioral part of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything. I mean, like we were talking about, eating disorders or compulsions or, gambling addiction or anything. I mean, you just have to keep trying, because I mean, it's not like if I work on a Saturday, or if I do something that I said that I was not going to do, I'm just like, okay, well, I guess I just work on Saturdays now. I mean, of course not. I sort of say, okay, that was a setback, and I try to respond to it in the way that I know how. And at this point, I mean, I talk in the book about all the many, many things that I tried. And I think that all of them were effective in some way. I think AA was probably the most helpful for me, just because I'm a person who really kind of needed that structure and needed to be able to talk to people, because I was really isolated. So I think that once you know the tools, you can go back to the tools. And that's true for addiction, and it's true for, any number of behaviors. And so that's what I would hope that I would do. I mean, and that's what I encourage people to do when, I get contacted by people from all over the world, and certainly all over the country, saying, hey, I read your book and I'm struggling and I keep relapsing. And it's like, the only advice I can give is you're not a failure. Just keep going back to the tools that and keep going back to the tools that worked for you the first time, and they will work again. You just have to keep trying.
Yeah, it's that black and white thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even I've been trying to go on this new health kick or whatever to be healthy. And anyway, I was with my mother who, well, we won't go, that's like a whole nother podcast. But anyway, we were together over New Year's, and I started eating this piece of cake, and I was like, it's okay. I'm going to allow myself 2 treats a week or whatever. And I started eating the cake. And then of course I couldn't stop because the sugar was whoosh, so then I started eating. And then next thing you know, I'm eating off someone else's plate. And next thing you know, I'm don't, that's halfway in the garbage, and I'm well, I'll just finish that scrap in the garbage. Well, and then I said to my mom, I was like, I've ruined it. It's over again. I thought this time it would work. And she's like, it's never going to be over or not over. This is your life. It's just a day. It's just a meal. You pick up it. Tomorrow is another day. Don't worry about it. And I feel that voice, it would be nice if we all could have that voice in our own heads. Right.
Yeah.
We're also harsh on ourselves for the tiniest missteps. I mean, I'm massively, extrapolating here, which I probably shouldn't, but it seems very black or white. I've relapsed. I haven't. And maybe in alcoholism, it is more black and white, but, or maybe one drink instead of, maybe I'll be okay with just this, or maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, and for me, I'm a person that the way that I historically drink, and I think would continue to drink, is I can't have just one drink, but I probably could tell myself that. And, and then I think I would sort of be on the spiral. But I also think that there's a spectrum of relapse, and some people refer to it as a slip, when you just have one drink and then you are whoa, I can't be doing that, and tomorrow's another day and you start over. I think that there is sort of all or nothing thinking among some circles in the recovery world, where you go back to day 0 and you start all over, and that's you've done it now. You may have had 10 and a half years, but now you're back at day 0 and you're crawling back. And I think that's really, really not helpful and counterproductive, and it keeps people away. So I kind of prefer to encourage people and to encourage myself to be, gentle on myself. Because I wouldn't talk the way that I talk to myself, to a friend. I mean, ever. Yeah, I wouldn't have any friends, So I think that's a really important thing that, I try to kind of, when people ask me, and they do ask me a fair amount, it's just to be gentle on yourself with whatever it is that you're trying to change in your life. Because it's not, it's not a sprint.
Very true. And I don't know if this applies or not. For me, when I'm trying to just be more mindful of food and not wanting to eat dessert like every second, I'm like, okay, this is a craving. This is a feeling. Like, this is a feeling that is going to pass, and I'm going to ride out this feeling, and I'm going to walk in the other room, and like slowly it's going to go away, and it's not going to be as hard.
Yeah.
And it's like acknowledging it. It's like, yeah, feelings are one thing. They're like one piece of your brain. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm talking about myself so much. I really apologize.
That's okay. I think it's all related. And I think, it's funny. Like I actually, sometimes I mentioned that AA is a lot like cognitive behavioral therapy. And like, you learn the 12 steps in AA and you do what's called working a program, which is, you sort of try to apply tools that you've learned to like every part of your life. And I often sort of say that to friends who are not in recovery and who don't, necessarily have the addictive type issues, I feel bad for you that you don't have a program because having those tools is so useful. And like, whether it comes from therapy or a recovery group or whatever, it is so useful to be able to just kind of talk back to your thoughts in that way. And that's one of the things that we learn, in recovery circles is like, this is, like you said, this is just a feeling, this will pass, live for today, one day at a time, et cetera, all those cliches. And I talk in the book about how they are really annoying at first. And then something changes and they start to seem like wisdom. I think about that stuff all the time, to this day. I mean, I think, this too shall pass. One day at a time, all that stuff that just seems so stupid and like a dumb little slogan on a wall. Like it is incredibly useful in the moment.
I agree. Very true. Okay. Well, having written a memoir, even though you don't like to write, what advice would you give to aspiring authors?
I think that the reason I was able to write this particular memoir, I'd never written a book before, is because I had an idea of what I wanted it to be and what I wanted to say. I think that if you're going to be in very practical terms, if you're going to be pitching a book, I think outlining it is really an important first step. And I sat down and I wrote an outline and I wrote a pitch and I did the whole thing like in a weekend. And I'm not, again, this is like my sort of compulsive work behavior. I wrote 50 pages in a weekend. I don't recommend doing that. But I think, it's really important to have a theme and an idea of what it is that you want to say in the book. And I'm speaking about memoir and nonfiction because that's kind of my area of expertise, I guess. But I also think, I'm ordinarily a magazine I come out of the alternative weekly newspaper magazine world. Now I write a website. And the pieces I write are usually between, 1,000 and maybe 3,000 words. So a book is, my first draft, it was something like 120,000 words. And initially, like that number of words just seemed so daunting that I couldn't imagine putting anything on the page. And so again, like I used that outline and I broke it down and I just thought, okay, this is not a book. This is a series of stories that will proceed in a more or less chronological order toward, from the past toward the present. And I broke it down into chunks and the book has a lot of chapters. It could have had 10 chapters, but it has many more than that. And that in part is just because my writing practice, it was more effective for me to write it in small chunks and to think of it as small chunks rather than like this mountain that I had to climb. And then eventually, I got to 120,000 words. My editor said, this is way too long. And we ended up cutting about 25,000 words out of it, which was great. And I love that process and I love editors and thank God for editors. I also am an editor myself, but I can't edit myself. So I was really, really grateful to have this amazing editor who was willing to work with me and just kind of cut mercilessly. But I think the biggest thing is just like don't think of it as a mountain you have to climb. Think of it as like a series of, discrete plateaus that you have to reach.
I love that. I just wrote a memoir that's coming out this summer and in July. And I did this exact same thing. I was like, I can't do this. It's too long. What am I going to do? And then I was like, I'm going to write a series of scenes and each scene, I'll just write a scene at a time. And then each scene will link them all together. And anyway.
And it actually, like for me, it was weird. Once I started doing that, it just sort of proceeded like magic. Like
yeah, me too. It was like boom, boom, boom.
Yeah. And you think it's not going to work, but then it does. And yeah, it was a really amazing process. I mean, it took way longer than anything I'd ever written took. But yeah, it was not, people often ask like, wasn't it really hard to write a book? And it wasn't any harder than the rest of the writing I do. And I actually, once I kind of set myself to it and put myself in the mindset of like not being a news writer, but being a memoir writer, it actually was really, really fun to kind of play with, the way that I wrote and to write in a way that I don't usually, because I'm usually very straightforward, kind of just the facts sort of writer. So I didn't have to do that with this, which is really fun.
Awesome. Well, this is great. I feel like I have someone I like share a brain with in part here. I don't know, so many of the same coping habits. Anyway, it's nice to see it reflected and know that.
Awesome. Yeah, likewise. This has been really fun.
Well, thanks for coming on, and I will think of you as I don't work in the mornings, and I will think of you on Saturdays. And
awesome.
Do it. And yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. It was great to get to know you.
Thanks, Zibby.
Okay. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.